I need some traction. You need some traction.
Thank you very much, Lloyd. I am Jake Dunlap, godfather of sales, TBD. I don't know if it's quite there yet, but we'll see. So my background, why am I here? So, I got started in tech at a company called Career Builder. Was in the Valley, didn't really know a lot about startups. And then a company called Glassdoor called. I was employee number 20 and helped to build out the sales organization from really 0 to 40 people in about a year. And so that was really my first experience in this kind of rapid growth, building a sales environment of like, Jake, just go figure it out, do it, like spend the money as fast as possible, which was a lot of fun at 29, 30 years old and having very little idea of what to do with it. Since then, I went on to be the head of sales at a few other startups, and really I started my own company, Skaled, because what I saw in the market was that many times companies had very limited options when it came to growth, meaning they would hire consultants, God bless them, I'm one of them now, but they were really great at giving me advice, but then it was like, well, this is for like 25 steps from now. Like, how do I go from like this stage to this stage? And realize that what happened is that most companies need actually tactical support, which is, how do I build out a playbook? Like, should I hire SDRs or salespeople? When should these things happen? So I started Skaled really with this idea that we could come in and work with companies to help them through these transition periods. So, we've been kind of the first head of sales or the interim head of sales for 15 or 20 different companies. We work with hundreds of startups at this point. Again, what we do is we help them to optimize and make more efficient their sales organization, whether it's top of the funnel sales or customer success and account management. So really quick, if everyone wants to text Skaled to this number, we're gonna try it, we're gonna give it a shot, we'll see how it works with the live poll. So what we're gonna talk about today, when it comes to scaling the sales machine and when it comes to scaling at an efficient clip, there's a lot of different variables, but how we like to think of this is there's really the triad. When we talk about scaling and we talk about growth, we like to think of, growth happens and scalable growth happens when we have the triad, right? And we refer to the triad as people, process, and technology. Meaning, do we have the right people and the right structure to support the people that we have and are going to have? Do we have the right process to not just acquire these lighthouse customers, the customers that we have today, but to acquire customers in a scalable, repeatable way? And then finally, do we have technology implemented to be able to help to make the entire machine more efficient, right? And so, the first two are the most important, right? The people that you're gonna have, they're gonna help to lead the ship. And then the process that they're gonna execute is also equally important. So today we're gonna talk about all three of these. And then we're gonna talk a little bit about at the end about technology, some of the trends that we see. I'm gonna show you some slides about really cool, amazing sales tech. It is not a comprehensive slide. I mean, it's as comprehensive as possible, but there's just so much. It's just an awesome time to be in sales. So, all right, let's see if this thing worked. Definitely did not work. What I thought would be interesting is just what are we thinking about? So as CEOs, sales leaders, divisional leaders, what are we thinking about, right? Hiring and scaling, optimizing lead gen, optimizing the current sales process, or account management. So if everyone wants to just quickly text A, B, C, D, then I'll know where to spend my 30 minutes. All right, it works. This is great. Everyone wants to generate more leads, always. All right, cool. Well, yeah, generate leads. It always wins out. One person cares about account management. That's great. Where do you think your best customers come from? Inbound, outbound, or your current customers? Current customers. Zero now. Someone I don't even think that was possible to resend the vote. All right, I'm going forward. Okay, okay, good. So we've got a lot. We're going to talk quite a bit about hiring and scaling, and not at all about account management. So if you're in account management, I love you. I think that you're extremely value-added to the organization, but apparently nobody in this audience does. Or maybe there's no account management people here, so they couldn't get the votes. Okay, so let's talk about hiring. So hiring is what I think of is typically kind of the least sexy part about scaling. It's like, how do we find these people? How do we get them up to speed? How do we make them successful? But as many of you know, it is literally the most critical part of building out a high-performing sales organization. The problem that we have with sales as opposed to other parts of the company as a whole is for some reason as founders, we think hiring salespeople is easy. right? We think, they're salespeople. Like they'll come in and they worked in the industry and like they'll just figure stuff out. And then we have churn and we're like, oh, well, that person sucked or whatever it is. Like for some reason, like we don't have the same rigor. Like you would never hire an engineer and said, oh, she did engineering at Facebook, so like we're just gonna hire her because she was an engineer. Like you would never hire like that. But for some reason, when it comes to sales and the different roles that we hire in sales, we consistently hire like that. We say, oh, she was a top performer at X, et cetera. And so therefore they're gonna be great at our company, right? And so as you're growing your sales organization, and I think probably for this room in particular, probably all of you or most of you are thinking about growing, we're facing some really bad headwinds, meaning this kind of new, as sales is maturing and what it means to be in sales is maturing, we're seeing churn, and churn, we're talking about churn at like top SaaS companies, right? Whether it's Salesforce, Marketo, et cetera, right? The average rep turnover today is 34%. Right? 1 out of 3 people that you hire will churn within the year. And we're talking about really good, really experienced sales leaders, directors of sales, et cetera, and these are the best numbers we can do. The other issue is that ramp, right? I won't ask for a show of hands, but almost every company that we come in and start working with, the ramp time for their salespeople is 3 months, right? It's 3 months, it's 4 months. It's like this universal number that we've just like picked out of nowhere. And in reality, to actually get your reps to performing, it's more like 6, 7, right? Sometimes in SMB sales, it's a little bit sooner, right? So as you're trying to grow and as you're trying to scale, and you're thinking about your 2016, looking at 2017 numbers, if you're not getting ahead from a hiring standpoint today of trying to find the right people, the chances that you're gonna hit your number are slim, right? So why does this happen? So why do people churn, and especially at these kind of growth stage companies, why do people churn, okay? It's because we think every salesperson that we hire is a rock star, right? We're like, oh my gosh, I hired John, he's a rock star. I hired Susan, she's a rock star, whatever it is, right? Unfortunately, lots of salespeople aren't rock stars, right? They're just okay, right? And by the way, like that's totally fine. Like you're gonna have people that are good. They're not rock stars, they're good, right? And so the problem is companies hire people thinking that they're hiring nothing but the 5%. I'm hiring the 5% who are the best, but in reality, like probably not, right? So as a company, it's your job to figure out and not expect salespeople to figure out for themselves how to be successful, right? It's not just you hire a salesperson, they figure it out. You hire 10 salespeople, they figure it out. I'm sure many of you have went through this kind of first phase of growth where you hired your first 10 or 15. It was like, oh shit, we've had like 20, 30, 40% turnover. Like now we need a grown up. Then you overhire the grown up because she or he can't get their hands in the weeds. And it's just like this vicious cycle. And then like 2 years later, you figure it out, right? And so your job as a company, right, to get to that 90% is there's 2 core things that you have to do to set your sales team up for success when it comes to hiring. Step 1 is you have to have the process in place. Even if it's not a great process, right? Even if it's not the most leading edge, amazing process, you have to have things documented. Most of even sales leaders that you're gonna hire aren't used to creating, right? Most of the leaders that you hire, they're used to like implementing and executing and being strategic. They're not used to really like building out processes. So as you think about your sales org and as you're scaling, you have to put in place this kind of basic framework that I'm gonna talk about here in about 10 minutes, okay? The second is interviewing, hiring, and onboarding. Again, we think that salespeople are just made, that they're like, oh, I know my cousin Rick, like he's good at sales, so like we'll hire him, right? And unfortunately, it's not true, right? And that means that having a very, very diligent interview, hiring, onboarding process is absolutely critical, especially as you're starting to scale, right? I'll tell you my fail story was, we were at Glassdoor and we were ramping super, super quick. Our interview process was like, it was pretty half-assed. But it's like, it's like bodies, like get them in, like let's go. And then, we did a moratorium. We started actually to implement assessment testing. I'll talk about why that's really important in the hiring process, especially as you scale. And what we started to realize is like when we did kind of our look back at the year about the people that churned, the people that we had to let go, et cetera, the common trait they didn't have was problem solving. They weren't that bright, right? We were selling something that like HR, the head of, I'll never forget, like one of my first shows I did, the head of human resources at United Health there comes up and is like, Glassdoor, like you're the company that talks trash about my company. It's like, yes, we are, right? So we didn't spin it that way, but my point is that the interviewing and hiring and onboarding, especially as you're starting to ramp and scale, it just becomes so important because when it's inefficient, bad hires, there's so many studies about what bad hires cost you from time, from money, et cetera. You just can't afford to hit it, right? Because you're starting to think about your 2018, your 2019 numbers, and those reps, again, they take a while to be productive, right? So you have to have like these just basics in place. So, and the reason that this is equally as important is that the reason people leave is usually they shouldn't have been hired in the first place, right? You hired the wrong person, right? That when you went through the process, for whatever reason, they were like good enough for 6 months or 12 months, but they weren't actually the person to help to get you from point A to point B. All right, so let's talk about roles. For some of you, this may be a little elementary, but what I find is that a quick refresher doesn't hurt. So I'm gonna walk through how we think about the key sales roles, right? Sales, I'm gonna talk about account management, you're gonna have to listen. And I'm gonna talk about support roles, right? Which is the other role that we tend to neglect, right? We look at support heads as overhead as opposed to by the value that they can drive. So I'll talk about outsourced help, right? Raise of hands, how many people actually use outsourced talent to help with lead gen? Okay, it's about 20% or so, right? If you think about what's happening in sales today is we're seeing these specialization of jobs, right? There's the SDR, the salesperson, the account manager, sales ops, et cetera, which are all specializations of what used to be like the sales guy back in, late 90s or early 90s, right? And the problem is like we live in this global economy now where there's all these mundane tasks that you have salespeople doing and lead gen reps doing where outsourced help is an extremely viable option, right? There's Upwork, there's a lot of other tools. And so for all of you, I saw that outbound and generating more leads was really important. If you're not utilizing outsourced talent to do that job, imagine instead of having your SDRs source, they come in the morning and they have 250 leads ready for them. That'd be pretty amazing, right? And I just spent $20.50 to do it. Right, to make the whole machine more efficient. So outsource help is important. Sales development reps. Most of you probably know what sales development reps are. How we think about what a sales development rep's job is, their job is to follow up on leads and generate SQL, sales qualified leads, right? And that usually means in a mature organization, they are actually running the first meeting. Your SDRs should not be appointment setters. If you need appointment setters, there are plenty of other outsourced firms that can do appointment setting. SDRs should be adding value in the process. They should be qualifying deals. I agree that there should be some threshold if it's the CMO of Hearst or whatever that it can skip, but for the most part, your SDR should be smart enough and good enough to be able to qualify deals. All right, finally, the sales guy or woman, right? Sales today has been squeezed, right? And what I mean by that is that back in the day, salespeople found their own leads, hunted their own leads, set up their own meetings, closed their own deals, managed their own accounts, dealt with service and did everything. Today, the salesperson just basically closes deals and negotiates, right? And so when you think about, we like to akin the salespeople to the Ferraris, right? They're usually being paid more than about everyone else in your organization. And what we do is we burden them with a bunch of responsibilities that other people could be doing. Whereas in reality, I want my Ferraris running around the racetrack as many times as possible because that's what I'm paying them to do. So I want to take off cumbersome things like lead generation, account management, et cetera. I want them focused on finding new deals, right? Account management, right? So we'll talk a little bit about account management, customer success, like what's the difference? Whatever title it is that you use in your organization isn't really important. There's really 3 core roles that we see as the companies start to reach maturity. There's obviously a lot more, but these are the core. One is onboarding. Onboarding, again, becomes a very monotonous process, right? That doesn't add a lot of value to the long-term relationship of the client, right? It adds value because obviously we want them to launch, right? But it's not really, we don't really need like a rocket scientist to just make sure that we get the users set up on the system, right? Make sure we get the first trainings done. Right? So onboarding is one of these roles that we typically don't specialize until too late. And again, we burden our account management and customer success team with these basic activities. Because again, think about your account managers. The modern account manager is a salesperson, right? If you think about what account management means today and what it's going to mean tomorrow, right, as salespeople continue to just focus more and more on just new deals, account managers are focused on closing deals, right? It's no longer good enough to have an account management organization that's built on surviving. They have to be focused on revenue generation, right? And that's how we look at the difference between account management. Account management owns the business relationship. Customer success owns basically the support functions, making sure that they have what they need, making sure that they're doing trainings, et cetera, and we decouple those. One thing that we did at Chartbeat that I think was pretty smart, I did it, so I think it's smart, is we actually spun out customer success, we called it our chart core, and we actually spun that out to actually have a hard line to product and a dotted line into me, which what it did is customer success is sitting with your end users every day, training them, making sure that they can use the product. Like who better else to give feedback to product than like that team, right? And so we actually had this customer success team that, again, kind of like reported into us as a part of their pod with account management, but they really had a lot of responsibility to product. And that really creates a really amazing product feedback cycle for you as well too. All right, next, support role, sales ops, right? Let's talk about sales ops. It's usually the role when you talk to CEOs that are now at 50, $100+ million in revenue. It's the one role that they know they should have hired sooner, right? Sales ops is this person that it's, when we go and meet with a lot of companies that just raised 10 million or 15 million, And they're like, what is sales ops? And it's like, you talk to them about it, and then once they have a sales ops person, it's like you can't live without it. Sales ops' job is really to make the machine function, right? They own all these internal workings, reporting, forecasting, make sure the sales team has what they need, the right reports, dashboards, et cetera. And imagine what that does, not just for the individual rep, but what that also does then for your leaders. If your sales leaders aren't spending time generating reports, sales leaders should be spending their time looking at and analyzing the reports, not generating the reports. And there's all these different activities that go into sales ops and sales enablement and usually we see like the inflection points around 10 people. When you have 10 people in your sales organization, it's usually time to hire at least one. And then we really see like that ratio kind of continue. For every 10, you hire one. All right, so hire for the task, right? What does this mean, right? So try to basically avoid things like in-manager hiring bias, right? And for you, if you're the founder hiring salespeople, your own bias, right? Because typically what we do is we know that we're really good at doing this, and so we're like, I just need to clone me. Like, guess what? You don't exist, right? Like you sit in this seat, and there's only one of you. Right? And then the other big issue that companies have when they hire salespeople, especially as they're first starting out in their first 5, 10, 15, 20, is they look for the salesperson, right? Who they think is the salesperson, right? If you guys have read, I'm sure most of you have read Hard Things About Hard Things, he talks about their first head of sales who was kind of this like anti-sales person, like in terms of fit, et cetera, but ended up being the perfect fit for them at that time, right? And when it comes to actually what makes successful salespeople, this is one of the best, for make successful hiring for salespeople. To me, I think this is one of the most important kind of pie charts to take away from, right? And this is from Harvard Business Review. So when they actually looked at performance and what actually led to salespeople staying on and performing, company culture, 10% mattered. 10%. At startups, we pride ourselves on culture, right? But almost to an exclusionary extent where we think of like, oh, this person's not a fit, they're not a salesperson, they're not a culture fit, right? Whereas in reality, culture fit has little to do with them actually being successful. I'm not saying that you shouldn't automatically disqualify, like don't hire assholes, right? But also like get out of your own way. Like there's a lot of people with other different ways of thinking and like they're really good at what they do. So like get out of your own way, right? The structured interview. We talked a little bit about, what are some of the important things that you need to think about for interview. Assessment tests. Assessment tests are equally as important as a structured interview, right? And a lot of people, there's assessment tests, but it works, right? Because there are things, salespeople are really good at interviewing, right? You would never hire an engineer without like making them write code, but yet you hire salespeople because like, I liked him, like he was good, like he's got the DNA or whatever it is, right? So like use assessment tests, right? They actually work. And it's not just like there's a lot of different types, formative, cognitive, et cetera, that you can utilize. And then reference checks, right? If you guys haven't read the book Who, to me, it's been a super helpful book, for, even for myself. But reference checks, that's like the best, insight you're gonna get to how well that person's gonna perform. But yet the reference check ends up becoming like a checkbox, right? How many times do you reference check someone and not hire them? I guess the percentage is much, much lower than what you actually do to hire them. And hopefully, that's not necessarily a bad thing because they've gotten to that stage. But really make sure that you use reference checks as a leading indicator of should you hire this person. It's not a checkbox. Like it's a really, really important part of the interview process, specifically for salespeople because they are full of it many times, right? And trust me, I've hired hundreds of salespeople, and again, like if I bat 3 out of 4, I'm not mad at myself, right? And usually it's because I'm stupid and I don't do this stuff. I'm like, oh yeah, he's gonna be great. Like I had a guy crying in an interview process. He was so passionate. I'm like, we gotta hire him. It's like bad mistake. Didn't work out. All right, so just some quick guidelines. I pulled some of this from probably all of you subscribe to Jason Lemkin and SaaStr, and Matrix also put out some content. So this is when you think about how to comp salespeople. We have one of our clients, who I won't name, who's like dead set on building a sales org with no commission. They have 15 salespeople now, but I don't really know. I'd like to think that it's possible that we could all just be altruistic and get like our maximum output, but I'm not convinced yet, right? So pay your salespeople a base, right? They're not selling real estate, pay them a base, okay? Right? Usually 8 to 11% of first year ACV. This is like super, super standard, right? Obviously this depends on the type of salespeople that you want to hire. These next 2 pieces are really important, and I added these specifically for this talk because what I see a lot of times with first-time comp plans is like we pay 10%, and then there's no like kicker or there's no floor, right? Salespeople tend to do what you incentivize them to do, right? So make sure that you have, I'm a big fan of quarterly incentives because someone can have a big month, they can have a bad month, and those kind of equal it out to where then I'm not overpaying for a bad month or a good month and then a bad month. to where it's, again, like the sum of the quota. But make sure that you have those incentives. So, again, what we did at Glassdoor was like, guys, like we had we went from 10 to 20% because it was early days and we're like, forget about CAC, right? And so what happened is, man, my guys wanted to get to quota as quick as possible, right? All of my people, their whole goal was like, get there in month 1, get there in month 2 of the quarter. So then they would crush it and then we'd have to pay them, funny money. That's what we called it, right? And in ideal, when you're mature, think of like a 1 to 6. Like if you're at 1 to 3 right now of like base pay and comp to quota, like it's not terrible, but ideally you'd probably want to try to get to 1 to 6. If I'm paying someone $100,000, I'd like them to produce $600,000. In reality, early stages, usually more like 3, unfortunately. Yep. Okay, so what are some sales costs? What should they look like? Again, if you're not in the good or the better or best for any of these, it's fine. This is all relative to your stage of growth, right? There are times when CAC should matter less. LTV should always matter, but where CAC, it's okay if it's high because you're going through this, wide strategy to get a lot of customers. But when you think about CAC payback, again, sub 12 months is good if you can do that for your customers. And again, these slides will all be available online, so take pictures, but you'll have it too. Okay, let's talk about sales process. Right, sales is a science. There are artistic components to it, but most of sales is a science. It's a combination of project management and psychology. Right? If you talk to great sales leaders and great sales people, what they're really good at is managing people through a process that maps to both the ideal buyer journey and then also maps to like your process to like make them successful and to use your product, etc. Okay? So step 1, I talked about this in the beginning, is build a map. Right? What happens in your sales process and document it, right? So especially for those of you who are just building out your first sales process, this is really important, or even if you have a more mature sales process, because just like your product, your pitch matures over time, right? As the market becomes more educated, right? As more people know who you are, etc. So your sales pitch is gonna adapt too, right? The way that they pitch at Salesforce today is much different than how they pitched at Salesforce 10 years ago, right? And so I think sometimes, you get stuck in this pattern, right? Whereas your sales team has to be like a product team. Like, hey, we're gonna be testing stuff, we're gonna be doing weird stuff. Like, we've got our little test team, they're running different experiments on new discovery processes, etc. But it's really important that you kind of build this map out, not just for the people that you're gonna hire, but also for the people that you already have. All right, so what are the most important parts to have in your sales process? So there's 3 key components. Step 1 is trying to find out needs, etc. Everybody knows this. It's like the oldest, it's value selling, spin selling, whatever you subscribe to, right? They're all like different acronyms of like relatively similar things, consultative sales. But you have to identify need. The second step that has to happen in every single sales process is you have to raise the importance of that need to something that somebody actually wants solved, right? We see a lot of people that have tools where it's like, we replace Excel and email. And they're like, it's so obvious that they should want to do X, Y, Z, or they replace something else that's like super basic. But the problem is like, well, it's kind of working. Like it sucked, like it's not great. And so the problem, like we actually have to educate. We have to get them to understand that the problem is really important. Like, oh man, I didn't think about that before, right? And then finally, we have to make them feel comfortable with the next steps. It's not enough to just say, it's just 2 lines of JavaScript. It's easy to get started. It's whatever it is. Like, you have to think, you're changing someone's workflow. They've been doing the exact same thing, the exact same way for 5 years before you ever showed up. And so the implementation process and talking about that pre-sales is absolutely critical to each step. Find the needs, raise the importance of those needs, remove the barriers to implement, right? And so that's why when we think about the sales process, it has kind of like, we've seen this, and again, we've worked with hundreds of companies, whether it's SMB or big enterprise. And what we've seen is no matter what the sale is, to who the market is, every deal follows this process. Sometimes the initial informal evaluation happen all at once in an SMB sale, where there's not other people that need to get involved, et cetera. But every single sales process follows this, right? And I want all of you to really think about how this maps to your own process. Step 1 is there's a discovery phase. Like feeling out, like, okay, do I like you? Do you like me? Is there something here? Like a couple of questions, great, all right. Then we move into an initial evaluation. It's like, okay, all right, there's maybe something here. Let's get some other people at the table and take a look at it. Then we move to formal evaluation, which is, great, it seems like there's something here. Now let's really get involved and let's start to go through contract. Every single deal follows this exact. Again, some's a little bit longer if you're an enterprise rep. Sometimes it's a little bit shorter, right? But we see every single deal follows some version of this, right? And so when you're thinking about building this out, let me go through this, not too quickly, but And again, I'll post these slides for you. So the goal of the discovery phase, and again, I think this is where a lot of misconceptions happen with sales, is the goal is not to close. Like almost none of you in this room have a one-call close product, right? And so the problem is we orchestrate our entire first meeting to be about this like fictitious event that's never gonna happen. Or we orchestrate it to be about a demo, that if I just show them it, man, oh, Rick, they're gonna love it. Like if I just show them it, they'll be so amazing. Like the goal of the first call is to get the next meeting with the right people. That's it. Or to disqualify. Disqualify is also a perfectly acceptable answer, right? My whole goal in the first meeting is to get the right people to the table. That's it. So your whole first meeting, the whole discovery process has to be architected around that goal and that outcome, right? And so you have to work it backward, right? We call it progress agreement, that we're agreeing to move to the next steps, right? And I'll put a longer form version of this deck online too that will talk to each of these in more detail. Really the most important piece, I'll just highlight from this discovery phase outside of the progress agreement is the worldview alignment. Most of you sell a product that doesn't replace anything, right? When we work with a lot of technology startups, you're replacing email and Excel or some other legacy systems, et cetera. So that means me as a buyer, I'm not that educated on why I should really care. I talked before about raising the importance of the issues. Worldview is a statement, right? If you guys read Challenger Sale, there's kind of tones of that here. But worldview is how I get you to see the world the way that I do before we ever talk about what we do. Because at the end of the day, and most of you are founders, if I listen to your pitch as a founder, like you already do this. If I listen to how you pitch investors, if I listen to how you pitch big companies, you go in and talk about the industry and you talk about the space, then I listen to your sales team and they demo. Like, why don't your salespeople say that exact thing to help to educate them, which is why you say it as well too. So in the discovery phase, we want to create momentum. That worldview is really important, and then getting buy-in to go to the next steps. All right, the initial evaluation. Again, this hopefully what happens at this next stage is we get more people to the table, right? Again, the whole goal of that first meeting is to get you excited enough or to realize like you're not competent or qualified enough to get me to the right person. Right? And again, you always make them feel like you're my champion, right? My champion, my influencer, and these other words. But at the end of the day, like to get the deal done, I know we've got to go talk to Rachel. Like it's not going to happen. Like I love you, Scott, but like it's never going to happen, right? So one of the biggest pieces with initial evaluation, we start talking about the implementation plan. And this structure here that I'm walking you through is like a typical, like we'll call it like mid-sized deal between like $15,000 and $50,000, right? These stages tend to stretch out. Like I think it's like an accordion. They shrink in whenever it's a very small deal. They go out when it's a much larger deal, right? But the key thing that I do in this next phase is you never want to talk about this as a proposal, particularly, again, with this ARR that I'm talking about now, right? It's an outline. It's always an outline, right? So great. So we're going to set up a next call. We're going to walk you through an outline and walk you through my thoughts, et cetera. The problem with the proposal is when we hear the word proposal, we hear finite. I'm sure all of you have lost deals where somebody came back and said, yeah, it was just too expensive, or it was just this or that. And you're like, well, we would have like acquiesced, like we would have done it, but you lost the deal. Right? So by making the second stage more of like an outline and a partnership to working through what a partnership might look like, you eliminate some of that. And in this stage, we start to talk about the implementation plan. The implementation plan is so important, right? The implementation plan, because what happens is when executives get in a room when you're not around, right? And they're all talking and they're saying, what do you think? What do you think? What do you think? Then the next question they go is like, who's gonna own this? Right? Are you gonna own this? So you're gonna go manage this product I've never bought before and we don't have kind of a clear way to buy it. I've got to go now figure out in my own organization how to own it and roll it out. They're like, you know what, can you follow up with me in like late Q3? Like that'd be a much better time to follow up with me because they don't have time, right? So that way talking about the implementation plan and like how we're gonna do all the work is really critical. All right, the last thing I'm gonna talk about with process, I'm running low on time here, is I talk about implementation plan, the proof of concept. You might know this as the trial. Right? The trial is the bane of many companies' existence. The reason is the word trial just sucks, right? It assumes that it's like set it and forget it. In freemium, and if it's like a really, really low MRR product, like fine, free trials, do it yourself all day. But if you're gonna take the time to do a trial, make it a proof of concept, right? And what's the difference, right? A trial is me trying something. A proof of concept is like, we're not going to do this unless you can do it right? And so you have to make sure your trial process is structured. Set up KPIs for success. What does success look like? Not what you think success is, what do they think success is, right? But what's important, as I backtrack a little bit, is you should try to set the KPIs for success most of the time because your customer is gonna ask for ridiculous things, right? Like, we should be able to increase conversions by 500%. It's like, no. Like, instead it's like, we can do XYZ by 30%, things that you know that you can do, right? So make sure that when you are gonna run trials, if you have a product that runs trials, make sure that you're always setting them up for success, right? If now is not the right time, great, because how many times do you guys have to reset the trial, right? Yeah, we'll do a trial, absolutely. Oh, you talked to him, great, how'd it go, Rick? Yeah, oh man, I was really busy. Oh, no problem, okay, I'll reset your trial. You're laughing because you know it's true, right? Okay, so now I'm gonna go into, sales process, understand why your people buy, adapt your process to the prospect, educate then sell. Most of you sell a product that is not a replacement, therefore I don't know why I need it. So if you can't educate me on the space and why it's important, it's gonna be really difficult for me to sell this internally and know why to move forward, right? And then remove the barriers to implementation, right? Project managed implementation. Help me to understand, just really quick, this is like a dirty one, right? It's like, who's gonna be involved? What's the schedule look like? Week 1, week 2, week 3. Because the statement I can say then is, Janet, guess what? We're gonna do all the work. Here's what's gonna happen. We're gonna do this, we're gonna do this, we're gonna do this, we're gonna do this, et cetera. Here's the homework, blah, 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 right? And so whether it's they're gonna go to a proof of concept or they're gonna go to a full-blown deal, this plan for implementation is critical in your process. So again, think of that. There's a discovery phase, initial evaluation, formal evaluation. This happens in every single deal that we see, so think about what that looks like for you. All right. Sales tech. All right, Gartner, right? 2020, 85% of sales for software will be handled by software, right? And what that means is that, again, just like how we're specializing all these jobs, we're seeing the rise of predictive tools that are teaching us how to work just the right leads, et cetera. People don't want to talk to you, right? Salespeople's value is like, oh, I like Rick. We go out and golf. I don't know why I picked Rick, but it's just like the most generic name. But I want to go and golf and like go out to wine with you and like all of these things. And now it's like, leave me alone. I've got a million things. Like, text me or shoot me a message on Slack, right? We as people, we value that human. Unfortunately, we just value that human interaction less than we used to, right? As a part of sales, and that's why this is going to happen. Sorry, it was a great poll. It's just about your sales stack. I'm over. So let's talk about, like I said in the very beginning, this is not every sales technology that exists. These are just the ones that we've seen or utilized ourselves, right? So predictive, right? Predictive tools are the future of sales. Your salespeople are no longer going to be allowed to forecast based on gut, I promise you, in the next 2 to 3 years, right? And the reason is right now, sales, it's such a gut-based job. What do you think? What about this? What about that? Like, we're starting to get more and more predictability, and there's tools that are starting to look at data from thousands of companies and millions of customers to where the next generation of predictive tools is gonna help basically just to tell you what the forecast is, right? Salespeople are really bad at forecasting, right? I'm sure all of you have seen this, right? They're overly optimistic. It's gonna close this quarter, I promise, right? So these are some of the tools that we utilize for predictive, some of the tools that we use for research. Again, if you sell one of these tools, I apologize. I'm sure it's a great tool. Spiderbooks is an interesting one. What I like about Spiderbooks is Spiderbooks tries to turn prospecting around, which is tell me the companies you want to target, what keywords they should talk about, and I'll tell you who to reach out to, right? And to me, like that feels intuitively right. It's like, oh, okay, like, yeah, I should reach out to the people who are talking about it because we know from sales that usually you don't get the right person on the phone anyway, right? And you've got to work around it. So tell me who's already talking about it, okay? Outreach. Okay, this is where the big convergence is coming. How many of you guys use a tool like SalesLoft, Outreach, Persist, Tout, or Yesware? Okay, a decent amount, right? There will be consolidation, right? You look at Engagio, that's the ex-CEO of Marketo, right? What we're starting to see is these tools are starting to meld, meaning the same tool that you use for sourcing is the same tool that you use for your own cadence. And then, what Tout app is doing is they're using sentiment analysis to then look at like what emails are performing and not, and then basically telling you what to say, right? Like why allow salespeople to write copy? Basically doing outreach is a science experiment. How do I get opens? How do I get replies and people to book meetings that are qualified with me? Yes, I believe in account-based marketing, but for that like middle tail, you should be doing like bulk customization, right? So Sedo is also an interesting social selling tool that lets you automate a lot of interaction on Twitter. Out of these, I'm a huge fan of Insight Squared. For those of you who are just so frustrated with Salesforce and the data that you can't get, spend the money for Insight Squared. It is worth every penny, right? They don't pay me or anything. It's just extremely valuable for all of our clients. It allows you to get that data of like, what are our funnel metrics? Like, what % of our deals are converting? Like, you just plug it in and it just tells you. It'd be great if just Salesforce would do that. Finally, customer success, Gainsight to Tango. Before me, he talked a lot about handwriting notes. And again, we're seeing this kind of like using tech to do some of these things that feel very like one-to-one and thank you. So handwriting.io is a really good example of this. Like you can automate the handwriting so it feels like a handwritten note. Videolicious, like take a video of yourself, right? And send it, right? It's like HD quality videos, but it's yourself. But it's software, okay? Predictions, right? Predictive analytics, if you're not using them today, especially as your company is growing, you will be using them. It's not a matter of if, because everyone else is going to be using them to point their sales engine at only those top people. I'm going to better predict who closes, who doesn't close. I'm going to stop spending my time with people that never close and start spending my time with more people that don't. If you're not looking at your data and you're not trying to predict who you should be spending time with, you're going to be left behind, right? And so there's a lot of tools. For sales, this is very, very much in its infancy. Like, we're still getting there. But it's the future, as you guys should think about this, of making sure that I'm pointing all of my actions at the right people. Right? Why else is it important? Today, teams that use technology, right? High performers are 3.5 times more likely to use technology than low performers, right? So not only do salespeople that use technology, are they more successful, and imagine once you layer on predictive with that, then they're going to be 6, 7, 8, 9 times more effective. Because now I'm not just using data and tools to make me more efficient, now I'm also using predictive tools to help make sure that I'm being more efficient with the right people, right? And so finally, when it comes to tech, right, the way that we think, a lot of this is driven by the buyer behavior. Unfortunately, our buyers they want to talk to us, but just like digitally. And sometimes, and via phone too, like, don't get me wrong, cold calling, NetSuite? I think it was NetSuite did a big study on like their appointments set by cold calls closed at a 30% higher ACV than appointments set via email. So it's not that the phone is dead, right? It's not that people don't want to have that interaction. It's like they just want it less, right? The more you can automate, and it's not necessarily about automating everything, it's just about doing things digitally, right? You have to be adopting tech. And then the last bullet here that I think is really, really important is you've got to commit to the training and support. Don't just start investing in technology and just half-ass it, right? If you're going to make an investment, test and experiment like bullet 4, right? Have your little crack shot team here who's working on things, but then really make sure that you commit to the training and the rollout. Because just like I'm sure many of you probably tried Salesforce, it sucked, it didn't deploy correctly or whatever, and you're like, we're going to use Pipedrive or whatever it was, right? Or some other tool where you're like, that didn't work for us. Well, it didn't work for you because like it's not, not every tool is just 100% out of the box. You have to commit to it, right? So you have to be implementing sales technology in your stack. You really should start to look at predictive tools and then make sure that whenever you do this, you have a way to test and iterate, and then you have a way to roll them out correctly. So we've covered a lot, but that's it for me. Thanks, guys.
I need some traction. You need some traction.